Welcome back, everybody, to the Founders Corner. In today's quick tip, I'm going to be talking to you guys about financial forecasting and quick tips for software startups that want to go from nothing to investment to growth and so on. Let's get into it. So in today's quick tip, I'm going to be diving deep into how to properly financially forecast your startup. Now, forecasting, I'm telling you right now, you cannot go beyond a year to 2 years. That I'll tell you right off the bat. So don't expect to do a 5-year financial planning because I guarantee you things will change within 6 months. In the startup world of software, everything is constantly changing. All of the variables are constantly changing. So don't try to plan too far ahead. What you want to do is build your business objectives. That's your 5-year goal and plan. But your financialing, please do not go beyond the 18 months or even 24 months. Before we even get to the tips, financial forecasting is going to be crucial for you to stay alive. A lot of startups that actually are successful and doing great, the biggest problem is their cash burn. Okay, the biggest issue and the reason why they go into default or they go into bankruptcy is strictly because of lack of financial control. So if you do make a successful startup, that's great. You've climbed one mountain, but the other mountain is the financial mountain, and that is a behemoth on its own. So today I'm going to give you 3 tips on how to manage and climb the behemoth of a mountain called the financial forecasting. Tip number 1 is start with a solid foundation. What do I mean by that? What you need to truly understand before you start doing forecasting and all the other things, you need to truly understand your pricing model, your expenses. What is it that you need for the lights to stay on within your organization? So that's what I mean by starting with a solid foundation. Understand your revenue streams, understand where your expenses are, where you cannot cut expenses is a big one, and also find out what your cash flow is gonna look like, okay? And what do I mean by cash flow? You can be a net negative income statement type business, yet if you have solid cash flow, you can sustain yourself for years. So don't look at the income statement as I didn't make enough money, negatives, losses. That's okay. Cash flow is what's actually going to kill your business. That means the cash coming in every single month and cash going out every single month is truly going to be your biggest problem, and how to manage that is going to be your biggest struggle. So make sure you understand, where does your income come from? How much can you make in a single month? And what are your biggest expenses that cannot be delayed or pushed over to the following month? That is to keep the lights on. So tip number 1, very general, very broad, but I want to make sure you guys understand. Understand your cash flow, understand your revenue streams, and understand your biggest expenses. Those are the 3 things I want you to focus on before we even move on to the next tips. So start with that solid foundation. Tip number 2 is I want you to throw away all the statistics, all the things you think you know about cold calling and how much percentage is. Look, statistics is great. I love statistics. But at the end of the day, for a startup, statistics is very unrealistic. In order to achieve statistics, you need to actually be generating enough cold calling for you to say that 2% is going to be my income stream from if I make 1,000 calls. That's assuming you can actually make that many calls, okay? If you already have the stat, if you've done it for 3 or 4 months, great, use it. That will be your biggest advantage. But if you haven't, you're just starting out, I want you to be incredibly realistic with your numbers. I'm not saying be conservative, but definitely don't be optimistic, especially if you're a startup and you start pointing out those optimistic numbers where it's this little hockey stick of a financial forecasting. Forget it. That's not going to work. I can honestly tell you, I have never seen an accurate financial statement or forecasting for any startup ever. And honestly, I can tell you the optimists are completely wrong and the pessimists are a little bit off, but they're never in the surplus. So I always want to say this, assume for the first year that you will not generate what you believe you will. because you're going through a phase of understanding how you're going to get your customers, you're understanding where you're going to go with your customers, how the whole onboarding thing. There's so many unknowns for your financial statement. So the biggest thing I want you to focus on, how much do you need to keep the lights on, and how are you going to manage your expenses to make sure that those lights stay on for the year. After 1 year, you'll have plenty of data, plenty of information to go off of, and actually make accurate number estimations for your following years to come. But your first year of operations, I promise you, everything you've done is wrong. So make sure you go back to the table and understand two things. What are your expenses and how much you need to do in terms of revenue to survive for the year? In my opinion, everybody does this backwards. And it was a podcast, I'm not too sure where I heard it. Go backwards. Find out your top expenses and then work your way backwards to make sure you understand what you need to charge in terms of a pricing strategy to be able to keep up with the volume of your product and your software for the 1 year. Once you hit the 1 year, then you go focus on the financial forecasting. But again, do not go beyond a year to 18 months. Definitely not beyond 24 months. Tip number 3, scenario planning. That is the one thing that most startups do not do, is find out where their biggest risk factors are and what would happen if that risk is activated. So scenario planning is for you to sit down and figure out, okay, if I'm hitting these levels of revenue, for example, what do I need to do in order to proactively approach this, right? Or if I'm not doing enough sales, what if your forecast says, you're going to make $500,000 in the first year, but you're only on track for 250? What will you do? You have to preemptively plan so that you're not actually stressed out when things are happening. You're almost following an executed plan based on what you've already assumed for, okay? So always assume your revenue is going to be half the amount. That's the first scenario you need to make. So if you're assuming you're going to make $500,000 in the first year, what would happen if you only made half that? What would happen if you only made $250,000 in the first year? What kind of expenses can you cut and what kind of expenses can you never cut, right? You have to figure these things out because you're going to know if you're on track for $500,000 by 6 months or you're on track for 250. You might get lucky, you never know, but you need to plan and you need to be prepared for it. That is the number one thing about financial forecasting, is basically you're creating a plan in case something happens, in case you're on track for scenario A, B, or C. That's all forecasting is. Forecasting is not a one and done thing. Forecasting is basically a preemptive planning for you as the executive to make proper decisions that you've already planned for so that you're not making hasty decisions at the time of the highest stress factor for startups. Okay, so again, take financial forecasting, cut it in half. What would you have to do to survive if that happened? That's all financial forecasting is basically you planning based on different scenarios that could possibly happen. Do a middle, a low, and a high. Because a high is also a problem, by the way. If you're doing double that, that means you need more staff. That means you need to plan for all these things. So you need to proactively, if you're seeing yourself on track for $1 million instead of $500,000, you're gonna have to start planning for how to hire people. Hiring people is not easy, especially great people. But it takes 3 to 6 months to hire people. So if you're already at $500,000 in mid-year, guess what? It's gonna take you to the end of the year to even try to hire somebody. So plan accordingly and understand what you're gonna have to do in each scenario. So to wrap up, make sure you understand what a financial forecasting is. That's the biggest thing. Understand your income streams, understand your expenses. Make sure that you use the data you have available to you that is specific to you. Don't go down the rabbit hole of finding stats online that gives you a 2% callback. Forget that. Just understand what it is that you can deliver under your circumstances, because I guarantee you all those other circumstances online with the data, with whatever they're giving you, it's a great guideline maybe, but they are using mass volume data to be able to give you that percentage. you're just not going to be able to do that same level of volume in order to achieve what they're saying they're achieving. And then finally, understand that you need to build scenarios for your forecasting. You need to know what would happen if you hit exactly on target, what would happen if you hit under target, and what would happen if you hit above target. They all have their problems, but plan those problems ahead of time so that when you're seeing a trend, you're seeing something is happening towards the top or the bottom, you can make the quick decisions early on so that you're not suffering later down the line when it's too late. Thank you all for watching our quick tips. If you have any comments, please let us know down below. Otherwise, hit subscribe, like our video. That really helps us keep building these videos for you guys, and share with anybody that you believe can really take some value from this. Until next time, Corridor out.